Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. It's part 2 of Patron Week, which means it's time to fulfill the wishes of one very helpful patron. The holder of the Quasar Commander tier gets to select an archetype all their own, and this month, CozyBoat275 has requested one of the most interesting, flavorful, and underrated themes to come out in recent memory, Ancient Warriors. Based on one of the most prolific pieces of literature ever written, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Ancient Warriors seek to reflect this masterpiece by bringing us a series of monsters that, despite the three factions in the story, work together mechanically, but subtly hint at the complex relationships of the major figures between armies. But what in the world is the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and what's it about? And the answer isn't entirely straightforward. In general, it covers a period of real-world history starting from around the time of the Han Dynasty, which would place the beginning of the story in the year 169 AD, and ends with the reunification of China in 280 AD with the formation of the Jin Dynasty. However, the book is part historical record and part myth, so not everything happened in real life as it happened in the book, but that's to be expected. Luo Guanzhong is attributed as having written it in the 14th century, and when you write about something that happened more than 1,000 years ago, a few details are going to get a bit embellished. And how much of it is fiction versus non-fiction? That I couldn't tell you. Romance of the Three Kingdoms is an epic spanning 800,000 words across 120 chapters, and I do not have the kind of time needed to cross-reference how much of the tale holds up to the historical record, let alone how it relates to the cards we see today. But thankfully, I've contacted an expert on the subject to help me out. Stick around until the end of the video, because I'll be interviewing ArtistWithAfro, a fellow Yugituber that has extensive knowledge on the subject, and is going to be answering my questions about how the theme relates to the story, as well as what we might expect to see from them in the future based on that knowledge. So, to keep me from going on my own 800,000 word ramble, let's do some annotations to cover the big players, sit in the war room to understand their strategy, then see what alliances we can form to outperform our opponent's army. Boot up your gaming machine of choice and pop in your favorite Dynasty Warrior game, because we're about to wade into battle with the Ancient Warriors. But before we continue, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and what better way to travel down the road than on your Duel Runner? We'll be covering iconic 5D's characters along the way, and our next stop is 20K, where we'll start the Yusei Explained series, covering Stardust, Junk, and whatever other cards we can play to help us rev it up. We've also got our Discord, where I think people are making Initial D references? I'm so out of the loop here. And a Twitter, where you can stay up to date on channel news and my bad takes. And if you really like what I do here, please consider joining my YouTube membership. It's basically like a Twitch sub, emotes included, or backing me on Patreon, where you can vote on a video that I make every month. It also gets you early access to my videos via the patron-only section of my Discord, provided I get the video done ahead of schedule. And whether you're a member or a patron, I get a schedule sent to you on the first week of the month, so you know what to expect for the next 4 weeks. Thank you all so much for watching, and now, back to the video. So, what's the deal with Ancient Warriors? Well, they're a series of Beast Warrior monsters spread out across 3 attributes: wind, water, and fire. Well, mostly 3 attributes. We'll get to the Maverick later on. Many of their effects involve sending cards from your hand or field to the grave, because you gotta spend a lot of resources when you're at war, or, in the case of several of their spells and traps, have their effects trigger when sent from the field to the grave. They are all called sagas after all, so it's like getting a neat little bonus for finishing a story. Hey, you. Yeah, you, I'm talking to you. Get out of here. Now, go, shoot, find another video. This is Yu-Gi-Oh! For crying out loud. We got standards. Who am I kidding? Also, many of these effects can only be activated or applied while you control another Ancient Warrior monster, which emphasizes that while these are legendary figures of grand import, they can never reach their full potential unless they've got someone out there watching their back. Let's start with our water attribute Ancient Warriors, who are all coincidentally level 4. Eccentric Lu Jing has 700 attack and 2000 defense, and they can target a continuous spell or trap you control, send it to the grave on resolution, and if you do, add an Ancient Warrior spell or trap with a different name from your grave to your hand. Also, if another of your Ancient Warrior's effects are activated except during the damage step, you can target a spell or trap your opponent controls and destroy it. Lu Jing is perfect for cycling through your spells, as several of them have effects that trigger when sent to the grave grave from the spell or trap zone. So you can get all the value you want from them while they're on the field, then have Liu Xuan swap them out for another, and then repeat the process to gain tons of advantage. I guess that's just how they scroll. Graceful Zhuge Kong has 1600 attack and defense, and can target a continuous spell or trap you control, send it to the grave on resolution, and if you do, add an Ancient Warrior's spell or trap from your deck to your hand. Also, if another of your Ancient Warrior's effects are activated, Zhuge Kong can target an effect monster your opponent controls and negate its effects until the end of the turn. So Liu Xuan and Zhuge Kong work as parallels. Both activate their first effect by sending continuous spells or traps to the grave, but Zhuge Kong is better in the early game to set you up, while Liu Xuan is essential for your grind game. They also suppress your opponent's game plan when using another Ancient Warrior effect, with Liu Xuan taking care of back row, while Zhuge Kong blanks monster effects. Not quite removal, but such brutal methods aren't always the correct way to go. Sometimes you need a bit more of a graceful touch. Masterful Sun Mo has 1800 attack and 1500 defense, and while you control another Ancient Warrior monster, Sun Mo can't be targeted for attacks. They can also send a card from your hand or field to the grave to add an Ancient Warrior's monster from your deck to your hand, and if another Ancient Warrior monster's effect is activated, except during the damage step, you can target a monster your opponent controls and return it to the hand. That's right, it's a searcher, and removal, and your other Ancient Warriors play interference for attacks. In almost any other theme, Sun Mo would be a boss monster, give or take a few attack points. But sequencing is important. Like any good commander, they do their best work when bolstered by their companions, so the more backup you can bring to bear, the more you can Sun Mo down your opponent. Okay, now it's time for our wind monsters, and the levels are a tad more varied this time around. Virtuous Liu Xuan is a level 4 monster with 1400 attack and 1200 defense, and while you control another Ancient Warrior's monster, your opponent cannot target them with attacks. Doesn't that sound familiar? If your opponent has more monsters than you do, you can send a card from your hand or field to the grave to special summon an Ancient Warrior monster from your deck, and when an attack is declared involving a different Ancient Warrior's monster you control, you get to draw a card. Between this and Sun Mo, you have a lot of ways to grab a lot of cards out of your deck, and while Sun Mo has built-in removal, Liu Xuan gets you card advantage while also giving you the ability to summon out your big Ancient Warriors quickly. They even protect each other from being attacked if they're both on the field. Isn't that neat? Cooperation, after all, is a virtue. Ingenious Zhuge Kong is a level 4 monster with 1000 attack and 2000 defense, and if they're added from your deck to your hand by the effect of an Ancient Warriors card, you can special summon them. When a spell or trap card is activated as a quick effect, you can send a face-up Ancient Warrior's continuous spell or trap you control to the grave to negate the activation. And when a monster effect is activated while you control Virtuous Liu Xuan as a quick effect, Zhuge Kong can send a face-up Ancient Warrior's continuous spell or trap you control to the grave to negate the activation. Zhuge Kong is the best search in this entire deck, if only for the fact that it essentially turns the search into a free summon. And as long as you have the right fuel, it's always a spell or trap negator, useful for stopping powerful equalizers like Lightning Storm or Evenly Matched, and with the right setup can then also negate monster effects to help insulate your field. Heck, you can just summon them out via Liu Xuan to make that effect active. Though, I've got a feeling they aren't allowed to rise up into the monarchy due to their position, which is a real shame, because this sure is one King Kong right here. Loyal Guan Yun is a level 7 monster with 2500 attack and 1800 defense, and if only your opponent controls monsters, you can special summon them from your hand. While they're on the field, your opponent cannot target other Ancient Warrior monsters you control with card effects, and if your opponent controls more monsters than you do, Guan Yun can just target an opponent's monster and destroy it. Goodness, this card is a house! It's a bigger Cyber Dragon with removal that shields the rest of your on-theme monsters from card effects. And while you can only use its summon effect when you don't have any monsters, we have a ton of ways to get Ancient Warriors onto the field, so that big level just means we gain access to rank 7 plays, should there be a need. They certainly know how to get with the loyalty program. Valiant Zhongdi is a level 7 monster with 2700 attack and 900 defense, and if you control 2 or more Ancient Warrior monsters, you can special summon them from your hand. If your opponent controls more monsters than you do, Zhongdi can activate an effect that gives them 2 attacks on monsters during each battle phase, and to top it all off, they have a continuous effect that grants them 300 attack for each monster your opponent controls, though that boost is only applied on your turn. This effectively puts the Wind Ancient Warriors in the going second crew, having effects that only work if you're behind on monsters, but don't underestimate them because of it. As long as your opponent has at least one monster to fight, Zhongdi will be a towering 3000, and still a respectable 2700 during your opponent's turn. And since the multi-attack is an activated ability, not some strange kind of continuous one, you can activate it when the conditions are right and keep it for the rest of the turn, no matter how their lineup changes, which is an excellent legacy for this valiant warrior. Now it's time for our Fire Force. Deceptive Zhuge Wen is a level 4 monster with 1100 attack and 1800 defense, and they can target a continuous spell or trap you control, send it to the grave on resolution, and if you do, have the attack of 2 face-up monsters on the field until the end of the turn. Also, if any cards your opponent controls are destroyed by battle or card effect, you can target an Ancient Warriors card in your grave and add it to your hand. Now, on the surface, attack reduction always sounds rather underwhelming, but remember, this is another outlet for our Saga's grave effects, and it doesn't target. There are very few monsters that can handle that kind of debuff, and while Zhuge Wen isn't always going to be in a position to take advantage of that, most any of their companions can. And just getting cards back to your hand by destroying your opponent's cards, or even when they destroy their own cards, is a fantastic way to keep the advantage train rolling. It's almost enough to make you feel sorry for Unchained players. Almost. Fearsome Zhang Yuan is a level 6 monster with 2300 attack and 2000 defense, and while they're on the field, all other Ancient Warrior monsters cannot be destroyed by battle. If any cards your opponent controls are destroyed by battle or card effect, Zhang Yuan can target a card your opponent controls and destroy it, so it's a great way to double up on destruction. And at the start of the damage step, if Zhang Yuan is in your hand when one of your Ancient Warriors battles an opponent's face-up monster, you can special summon Zhang Yuan from your hand, then that opponent's monster loses 1000 attack permanently. That's right, we've got a hand trap that's a battle trick. I can hear the distant cries of Nim Nim now on the wind. But seriously, this card is devastating. If your monster wins the battle that Zhang Yuan was summoned for, then they get to pop a card, and if they don't, you won't lose that monster because of the protection Zhang Yuan provides. Then you can follow up with an attack from this fiery fighter because they probably weren't over 3300 to begin with. And if they were, then we have an issue with names here because then that monster would be the fearsome one. Ambitious Cao Di is a level 8 monster with 3000 attack and 2500 defense, and while you control another Ancient Warriors monster, your opponent can't target or destroy Cao Di with card effects. When any of your opponent's cards are destroyed by battle or card effect, you can send another card from your hand or field to the grave to summon Cao Di from your hand, and when they do destroy an opponent's monster by battle and send it to the grave, you can special summon them to your field in defense position. That's right, we've got an on-theme Go-Yo Guardian. This card also pretty much cements the Fire faction of Ancient Warriors as the ones who excel when we take cards away from our opponent, so they synergize very well with generic cards that destroy, so get your Raigekis and Smashing Grounds ready. But despite the stat line and the Go-Yo effect, I still wouldn't go so far as to say it's the boss of the theme. Like, it's strong, don't get me wrong, but once it's on the field, all it is a big attacker with some upside and conditional protection. They could have added a bit more on top of it, maybe some negation or other quick effect interaction, but I suppose designing a card that strong would have been a bit too ambitious. But we still have one more main deck monster to go, and they are beholden to no faction. They care only for the thrill of battle and will side with whomever is the strongest, presenting the dark horse of the Ancient Warriors, or I suppose red hair, rebellious Liu Feng. They cannot be normal summoned or set, and must be special summoned from your hand by controlling the Ancient Warrior monster on the field with the highest attack. So unless you're in a mirror match, this is going to be pretty easy, and you can only special summon them once per turn this way. Also, once per turn, during any main phase as a quick effect, Liu Feng can destroy the face-up monster your opponent controls with the highest attack, your choice of Tide, but you can't activate any monster effects the turn you activate that effect, except for Ancient Warrior monster effects. Also once per turn, during the end phase, if your opponent controls a monster on the field with the highest attack, even if tied, you must give control of Liu Feng to your opponent. Now, that is pretty risky. If things go wrong, your opponent gets a big monster with quick effect destruction, though to be fair, that would lock them out of the rest of their effects, but for what it does, it's more than worth it. Not only is the destruction effect just great interaction and triggers basically all of your Fire Ancient Warriors, just by nature of being a quick effect means you can trigger all of your Water Ancient Warrior effects during your opponent's turn as well, which means MSTs and Effect Veilers on demand. So, despite the potentially crippling drawback, Liu Feng has a much better chance of making your opponent go Lu Boo Hoo. But that's not the last monster we have in store, because we have an extra deck boss as well. Ancient Warrior's Oath Double Dragon Lords is a Link 2 Wind monster with 1100 attack, requiring 2 Beast Warriors, including a Wind Ancient Warriors monster. While they're on the field, all of your Ancient Warriors gain 500 attack and defense, and if Link summoned, you can add an Ancient Warriors card from your deck to your hand. Also, as a quick effect, they can send a card from your hand or field to the grave, then target any face-up card your opponent controls and return it to the hand. This is an incredible way to use any Ancient Warriors monster whose effect you've already utilized. And Liu Xuan was the right choice for the card art, because their effect sets up everything you need for Double Dragon Lord's Link Summon. It's essentially a Stratos for your entire deck, that can turn any dead card into a compulsory evacuation device, while also boosting all your monsters. Break out the arcade cabinet, because when Double Dragon Lords hits the field, that game's gonna turn into a beat 'em up. Alright, now it's time for our spells and traps, the Ancient Warriors Sagas, showcasing some of the most iconic moments from their source material. 3 Visits is a continuous spell that can trigger during your main phase if you normal or special summon any number of Ancient Warrior monsters. You target one of the summoned Ancient Warriors, then add an Ancient Warrior with a different name from your deck to your hand. If it's sent from your spell and trap zone to the grave, you can special summon an Ancient Warrior from your hand. Perhaps maybe even what you searched with 3 visits, and it's sent to the grave during your second standby phase after activation, so no matter what, it's going to trigger eventually. So we've got ourselves a Black Whirlwind for the theme, including all the ups and downs that entails. You can search Zhuge Kong for the free summon, get Liu Fang for the free summon, or get Zhang Yuan for their hand trap capabilities and free summon. And if your opponent destroys it, or you get rid of it yourself for one of your effects, you get to summon an Ancient Warrior from your hand, which is very useful considering how big some of them can be. But no matter how you use it, it's just nice to have your buddies come over to visit sometimes. Sun Liu Alliance is a continuous spell that has an effect you can activate if you control Ancient Warriors of 2 or more different attributes. You declare one attribute, and monsters your opponent currently controls of that attribute can't activate their effects that turn. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, it's no VFD, but can either wreck shop against mono attribute decks, or take out one or more negation bodies your opponent has on the board. Also, if your opponent special summons any number of monsters, or you activate an Ancient Warrior monster's effect, you can make all your Ancient Warriors gain 300 attack for each Ancient Warrior you control until the end of the turn. And all of these effects apply even if Alliance leaves the field. Now, I admit many of our level 4 Ancient Warriors don't have the best stats, but the kind of boost you can get from Alliance is substantial. Even having just 2 gives Jia Wen a respectable stat line, and for every smaller monster that becomes decent, you've got a big Ancient Warrior that gets even bigger, meaning any duelist can certainly get behind this Alliance. Borrowing of Arrows is a continuous spell that lets you target a face-up monster your opponent controls and an Ancient Warrior you control, and until the end of the turn, cut the opponent's monster's attack in half, then give the lost attack to the Ancient Warrior you targeted. Yeah, it's Borrelsword Dragon on a spell. This means, as long as it can be targeted, any monster can fall victim to any of your Ancient Warriors. Or you can steal the attack, destroy the monster you stole it from, then use that stolen attack to defeat an even smaller monster. Or dare I say it, attack directly. And if it's sent to the grave while you control Ancient Warriors with 2 or more different attributes, you can place an Ancient Warrior's continuous spell or trap from your hand or deck face up on your field. Notably, this does not say it has to be on the field first, so you can pitch this from your hand without even giving your opponent the chance to interact with it, or use Foolish Burial Goods to pitch it right from your deck. And that means you don't have to wait a turn to activate your trap cards, making them a little more bearable to play. But what I don't get is, why do they need so many arrows? Double Dragon Lords only has like 6 empty slots for more Link arrows, you can't even use this many! East by South Winds is a continuous spell that's sent to your grave after the second standby phase after activation. And once per turn, during your main phase, you can flip a coin, and if it's heads, send winds to your grave. Now, why would you ever want to do that? Well, it's because its only effect that does anything happens when it's sent to the grave. When that happens, your opponent can't activate cards or effects in response to the activation of your Ancient Warrior cards or effects that turn, and it grants an additional effect to all Ancient Warriors you control when Winds was sent to the grave. Namely, when that monster declares an attack, you can destroy a card your opponent controls. Yeah, just a non-targeting pop that you can use up to the number of Ancient Warriors you had ready. That is one heck of a blowout card. Just be careful about the coin flip, because how good this card is in practice is really up to which way the wind blows. Defensive Chongban is a continuous trap that makes it so, when your Ancient Warriors battle, your opponent can't activate any spell or trap cards until the end of the damage step. It also has 2 other effects, but you can only use 1 per turn, and only once per turn. At the start of your opponent's battle phase, you can send Chongban to the grave to prevent your opponent from targeting any of your Ancient Warriors for attacks that turn, or it can be banished from your grave when an opponent declares an attack to special summon an Ancient Warrior from your deck. Either of these effects are incredible because they have the potential to blank an entire battle phase. If you don't have any non-ancient warriors, then your opponent can't attack at all using the first effect, and if you summon something like Zhuge Yuan, you can keep your smaller ancient warriors from being destroyed by battle altogether. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, encouraging teamwork between your ancient warriors so you can bridge the gap. Our last card is Chivalrous Path, a continuous trap that can be sent to the grave if any number of ancient warriors would be destroyed by battle to prevent their destruction. Normally, multiple ancient warriors can't be destroyed by battle at the same time, so I suppose it's worded that way in case two ancient warriors on both sides of the field hit each other with the same attack so you can save them both. Also, if your opponent special summons any number of monsters once per turn, you can special summon an Ancient Warrior token, which is a level 1 Wind Beast Warrior monster with 500 attack and defense. And when a card or effect is activated that would target any number of Ancient Warrior monsters you control, you can banish Chivalrous Path from your grave instead. Considering the kind of battle protection we have access to, the kind provided by Path isn't really that important, but the token does have some niche applications. It can give you the extra Ancient Warrior that you need on board to activate or apply other effects, or to link into double Dragon Lords, as it already fits the necessary monster requirement. Or just turn it into a Linkuriboh. How's that for battle protection? But if it were me, I'd be trying to send this card to the grave ASAP, as the targeting protection is of supreme importance when it comes to insulating your game plan from infinite impermanences and the like. We play in a game where being able to interact and stop your opponent is paramount. We play in a format where being able to interact and stop your opponent is paramount. But with this in your grave, you can bat those effects aside to carve a path to victory. Okay, so that's all our Ancient Warrior cards, but what do we do with them? Well, with the number of monsters we can field with interconnected effects, I'm confident in saying we've got a very aggressive deck that's complemented by a number of problem solvers. Alliance gives you effect negation, while Zhuge Kong can stop activations, and all of that is in service to a bunch of monsters that shine in the battle phase. Sun Mo bounces monsters, Liu Xuan draws you cards, Cao Di steals monsters. It's like we're playing a modernized Gladiator Beast deck that thrives in the battle phase, but is much less reliant on it to get their plays off the ground. In short, we're a mid-range deck that leans much more into the aggro than control, using the former's effects to help us build a big board to take over the game all at once. But what can we play to help them out? Any continuous spells and traps that we can play that can advance our game plan are going to be on the table. An obvious synergistic option is to play Fire Formation Tenki to search us some of our most impactful monsters. You can essentially use it to search Sun Mo or Liu Xuan, which can then be used to fuel their effect. Tensu is also an option to get us a sweet extra normal summon, which will unfortunately not trigger 3 visits multiple times in a turn, but can get more of those sweet level 4s on board while providing even more fuel. We also can't discount Floodgates in all this. Summon Limit is once again a huge MVP. Flip it once you've done your swarming, then feed it to an Ancient Warrior later on when you want to unlock your full potential. Ancient Warriors also plays well with other archetypes. We've already mentioned Fire Formations, and while I wouldn't suggest running a dedicated package of Fire Fists, Tiger King is a wonderful way to gain access to those Fire Formations, as well as negating an entire opponent's board. It also can't be denied how well Tri-Brigade fit in here. Thin your deck with a Fractal line, banish a bunch of cards to make Shreg for some interaction, especially if you have Chivalrous Path up to make a token in response to a summon, or make Bearbrum as part of linking up into it so you can search Revolt to get back any banished material, hopefully to make another Shreg. That's about all the info I have on Ancient Warriors, but we're not done yet, because I've got someone here who's got a lot more info. So without further ado, let me introduce you to this video's special guest. Hey, welcome back everybody. Whenever I knew I was going to do Ancient Warriors, I knew I had to bring in a specialist to get that extra bit of flavor and texture for all of you, so we are ending this video with an interview with a very special person who knows everything that I want to know, and I'm sure all of you will want to know about Ancient Warriors. Please, could you take some time to introduce yourself, let them know who you are, what you do, and where we can find you?
Alright. Hello humans, ArtistWithAfro here. I am another Yugituber that really specializes in sealed-only series based around Ancient Warriors, as well as some other art aspects of kind of like literary to artistical analysis of certain cards. I feel like I might be one of the many people that has kind of an extensive knowledge of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms and how Konami has accurately or inaccurately depicted some of the characters in the archetype. I can be found on many of the platforms under the same name, and there'll probably be like a little logo or something showing up here, graphic. ArtistWithAfro. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and of course YouTube. We are currently up to episode 5 of the Ancient Warriors sealed only series. So check it out. And if you have any other questions, or if you'd like to find me and find some duels, you can definitely hit me up.
And see, that's where the cross promotion comes in. You know, I have the explained video, you have the sealed only seal. Everything is working together in the mass Yugitubing media empire that we know as YouTube.
And these alliances are going to be very, very interesting as we start to talk about this archetype.
See, there we go. So yeah, if you know anything about me, you know I love looking into card art and mechanics to figure out the story that Konami has put forward. And you might know that, as mentioned previously, the Romance of the Three Kingdoms factors heavily into the inspiration, but it is a centuries-old novel that's been translated many times, and I don't have the time to read all that and do the research, which is why we have... I've got a series of questions for ArtistWithAfro here, so we're gonna go from the top of the list here. So in your opinion, which Ancient Warriors, maybe 2 or 3 of them, do you feel most effectively capture the spirit of the original characters?
So it's interesting that this was one of the many series that Konami kind of depicted where they took an aspect from an actual story and took the characters and tried to represent them kind of as accurately as possible. In your Magic Key video, you talked about the story of Solomon and how closely related to the demons the certain monsters were, as well as the character himself, Clavis. And we can kind of see that relation here with the Ancient Warriors. So Konami really did, again, an amazing job of representing the characters with aspects that are closely related to them from the original source. One of them that I think is really the most accurate would probably be Liu Xuan. Secondly, the other character would most likely be Liu Feng. So Liu Xuan in the story had the ability to really recruit companions through his charisma, through his integrity, and his actual kind of like skill of oration really helped him form the kingdom of Shu Han. Most notably, the 2 or 3 characters that he ended up recruiting ended up being some of his sworn brothers, such as Zhang Fei, which is represented in Zhang De, and Guan Yun, as well as Guan Yu. And then finally, of course, the character that I would say is the most pivotal for him to recruit, which is seen not only in the card itself, but also in one of the spell cards, was Zhuge Kong. Now, Liu Feng, on the opposite, was also another character that's very popular amongst people that know about the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. This is a character that's also familiarized by the name of Lu Bu, and he's not only known for his peerless strength and ferocity, but also his continuous betrayal. So this is actually seen really clearly in his ability to defect from sides, depending on which card is the strongest monster on the field. The last thing that I will note is that Konami also, if you were to dive deeper into the story, right, Konami kind of added these small nuances to certain characters that do relate to specific events that occurred within the story of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Most notably, I'm going to bring up Zhang Yuan with his ability to kind of summon himself on the field and reduce the attacking monster's attack by 1,000. That actually relates to, and I believe is a direct reference to the Battle of Hefei, where Zhang Yuan or Zhang Fei led a group of about 800 soldiers to counterattack an incoming force of 1,000 men.
No way.
That could be like the direct relation that they were trying to go with.
That kicks so... How did they get that much detail into all of that? Okay, so there's a lot of stuff that works really well here, but that might not always be the case. Do you find that there are some that are lacking in any regard, like the art direction wasn't off, like some of the armor isn't the way that it should be, or an effect that kind of betrays how the character should be portrayed, any of that kind of stuff?
So what's interesting about this is that with the Ancient Warriors archetype, it seems that Konami decided to omit certain pivotal events in the story, right? So we're introduced to certain characters from their specific factions. However, the relationships are given a more romanticized appeal. And this might be perhaps in order for them to kind of save face, which is something that is a lot more common amongst Asian cultures. Certain characters did have extreme animosity with each other, which kind of led down to events where they were trying to betray each other, trying to overthrow, very Game of Thrones-esque, where you had people trying to just, plot and plan ways of taking each other out. On the other hand, there are characters that do have deep respect for each other that aren't necessarily on the same side, but there really isn't much of an allusion to it unless, again, you know the original source material. Additionally, and this kind of goes back to what I mentioned before, the cards do seem to depict a time where the three kingdoms are already established. And it's kind of like starting your story in the middle, right? As opposed to starting it at the beginning, where we see some of these characters come into their positions of power and then establish their actual kingdoms that they're ruling after the end of the Han Dynasty. As a result, we do miss, I would say, the two most important parts of I would say, the prequel or phase one, which includes the Yellow Turban Rebellion, as well as the United Front against one of the more diabolical tyrants known as Dong Zhuo, where this kind of solidified the kingdoms actually going against a united enemy.
Ooh. So it might be more accurate to say that it's the romance of the creation of the three kingdoms, rather than one might think that they were already established. Like in most fantasy things, they already have this huge history, and they just end up having a conflict while here, as opposed to what's shown here.
Yeah, and I think that it can be, again, related to, any adaptation of, starting a story or not being able to include all of the aspects of a book into a movie, right?
Yeah.
Where you start from a certain point and you end also at a certain point where it's like there is a canonical ending of this romance, of this actual story that for some reason, unless we see in the future that Konami decides to continue with it, we are kind of stuck in this sort of like middle phase.
So we've got the three kingdoms, and we've got the attributes of fire, wind, and water, which I assume is supposed to designate the eponymous three kingdoms. Obviously, the entire theme should work together for gameplay purposes, but as individual factions, do you believe they're good representations of those factions per the book?
I do feel like the factions also have the attribute-specific representations more to the connection of their geographical locations, as opposed to any, again, metaphorical depictions or illusions. This, again, I will credit Konami for, because they had to have known, or at least had to have done enough research to know where the specific kingdoms were located in that region of China, and then again depict some of that artwork in the backgrounds of the characters, as well as the attributes of the specific characters themselves. And I can give you a specific example.
Yeah, please.
So we have Sun Mo, Lu Jing, and Zhuge Kong, right? Those are all characters from the Kingdom of Wu. This is located kind of more in the southeastern edge of China, and this overlooks two bodies of water, being the Yellow and the South China Sea, right? As a result, them receiving the water attribute is pretty understandable. And then again, if you were to kind of go more Western, right? And we look at the geographical aspects in the backgrounds of certain characters from Shu Han. This includes Liu Xuan, Zhuge Kong, Zhang De, and Guan Yu. They have they're from a more mountainous region. So again, if you look at the cards specifically, you can see the more mountainous aspects behind them. And then finally, of course, the characters from the Kingdom of Wei, having more access to industrial castles and strongholds, that again alludes itself to, again, creations of iron, stone, masonry, and then of course fire, which can be seen in their depictions. Now, there is one thing to note, and I forgot to mention this before, but artistically, people that are familiar with Dynasty Warriors, the Dynasty Warrior games, as well as the Three Kingdom games, might find it a bit jarring that the representations of Wu and Wei seem to have swapped colors. So Wu would be traditionally the kingdom that is synonymous with fire, that is synonymous with red, and Wei would then be the kingdom that's synonymous with blue, and technically water, if we were to make that assumption. There are metaphorical lenses that you can look at if you were to apply, let's say, a connection to the attribute to the aspects of the specific kingdom, right? So when we think about Wu, Wei, and Shu, most of these kingdoms either ran basically based off of ambition, virtue, and I would say family. right? Those would kind of be the main aspects. So if we were to take again the water, right, where water being something that connects all of us, you can kind of assume that this is where we're going with this, and that kind of ties into the family or familial aspect. The wind being more of a virtuous type of sort of element, something that can ebb and flow and move through different aspects and kind of like breathe life into a hardened or a separate area can also be something. And then of course the fire can attribute itself to the ambition that the ruler of Wei had in regards to wanting to take over, and spoiler alert, eventually succeeding in taking over the majority of that region of China.
The ancient warrior sagas are all notable events in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Are they given the same kind of attention to detail when it comes to how their effects reflect these stories? And do you have a favorite one? And if you have different ones based on different criteria, feel free to just let them all out there.
So again, really big credit to Konami here. Excuse me. Again, really big credit to Konami here. I think that they tried to accurately depict as many important aspects of the story within the sort of stratosphere of what they were trying to contain. Out of that, I think that the most important sort of Ancient Warrior Saga spells and trap cards are probably the Ancient Warrior Saga's 3 visits, which includes the story of the recruitment of the strategist Zhuge Kong by the main characters of Shu Han, right? So in the story, and this kind of relates to the cards as well, Liu Xuan, Guan Yun, and Zhang De had to approach Zhuge Kong 3 times before he decided to actually join their forces. And this can also kind of be something where it's seen as you're recruiting a character up to each standby phase, and at the 3rd standby phase, or rather at the end of the 2nd standby phase, the card itself destroys itself and you can special summon a card from your hand, an Ancient Warriors monster from your hand. So the other card that I think is also very important is the Ancient Warriors Saga, the Sun Liu Alliance, because this was kind of the turning point in the story where 2 factions finally decided to amicably kind of come together and have a united front against the Wei Kingdom. Now, again, spoilers, it didn't kind of come to fruition because there was still some sort of infighting, but it was a pivotal point in the story where you had, again, just these 2 aspects of characters realizing, you know, there is a greater enemy that we need to kind of unite against and then go at it. This can also be seen in the card's specific effect where you need 2 different ancient warriors of 2 different attributes to then allow them to negate the effects of all other monsters on the field, and then additionally gain 300 for every ancient warrior that is on their respective side of the field.
That's ridiculous. Sorry, I don't have good words for it, but just like when you talk like the separate like attributes having to be together for that, like that's goodness gracious. So far, the only extra deck card that we have gotten for Ancient Warriors is the Double Dragon Lords, which is the craziest Tri-Brigade card ever printed. But does this leave the door open to other Ancient Warriors Oath monsters? And which pairs do you think we might see in the future?
So, what I find interesting about the Oath specific aspect of the monsters is if we were to think about that aspect tying into, I guess, specific pairings and teams, this does create the opportunity to bring in characters that seem to have either been overlooked or, again, omitted from the story, right? So, for example, in the Kingdom of Wei, there were 5 Tiger Generals that were chosen specifically by Cao De, which was, again, kind of the main ruler. Now, we've only gotten one of them, and that was in the form of Zhang Yuan. But if we were to have, let's say, an Oath type of monster, we could essentially see the other 4 make an appearance, or we could see characters that were allied with certain characters also make an appearance in the cards. What I find really interesting is that they probably can take the same route that they did with the Brotherhood of the Fire Fist, where you have certain sort of factions or the kingdoms represented not only by the specific summoning conditions, but also, actually, yeah, you would have then the specific kingdoms represented by specific summoning conditions. So if we've already given Shu Link monsters, we can give Exceeds to, let's see, the Kingdom of Wei, or we can give Synchros to the Kingdom of Wu. And then that can kind of tie into, again, relative to how these characters are connected, or it can again go back to the reasons or the aspects of the specific kingdoms that made them sort of stand out. If you have family for the Kingdom of Wu, something like Exceeds makes more sense, where you have two monsters that overlap to then form another one. Or you could use fusions for that. If you have, like, Ambition or something where you're sacrificing certain things, you can go down the ritual route or the synchro route by giving up some certain amount of troops to then summon a much stronger general.
Yeah, that would be pretty sick. I'm am I remembering this right with the link conditions for double Dragon Lords? It needs one wind specific ancient warrior, right? And the other one can just be another beast warrior?
Yeah. So the reason for that ties back into some of the, I guess, the monikers that were given to certain characters, right? So in the Kingdom of Wei, we had the 5 Tiger Generals. Zhuge Kong is actually known as, I believe, the Dragon of the West. So that is why it's called double. That could be one of the reasons why they are called the double Dragon Lords, because the strategist himself that's standing in the background is, or rather was known as, one of the dragons of sort of that time of China. And dragon being a title that was given to people that were either really important strategists or, again, just really important people that were known all throughout China.
Is it possible one of those might be the because there was like the fact that certain factions didn't have the two people that had like respect for each other? Would it be possible to have one of those combinations, like requires one wind and one water beast warrior to make that connection?
So we could potentially see some more cross attribute pairs if we were to tie the oaths back into times when, again, certain characters were working with other characters from different factions. So there's an interesting note that the Ancient Warrior Saga, The Chivalrous Path, talks about the relationship between one of the characters from Shu, Guan Yun, and his relationship with Cao De being kind of like the main ruler of Wei. So we could have a fire and wind pairing based on the time that they were working together. And then again, the Chivalrous Path kind of goes back into the aspect that, again, they had so much respect for each other that instead of, hunting down the person after they're deciding to leave, Cao De decided to kind of just let him go and retain like the honor that they had shared while they were still working together.
That's really cool. I like the I think that possibility would be really, really cool. As someone who hasn't read it, obviously, I guess I wouldn't say that from experience, but the way you describe that sounds like that would be one of the sickest pack reveals of all times.
Yeah.
So I normally try to cap off these videos with a silly tech pick. They aren't necessarily good in the most competitive sense of the word, but can still do like interesting, unconventional things. What cards do you like playing in the deck that no one else, or at least very few other people, are playing?
So we're not going to mention, we already talked about the fact that Double Dragon Lords is probably the best Ancient Warriors Tri-Brigade card ever printed. I think, of course, anybody that's played Beast Warrior archetypes knows about Brotherhood of the Fire Fist, knows about the compatibility with Zodiacs, for hires, etc. There is one card in particular that I think really flies under the radar, but can tie back into kind of just more of the summoning mechanics and can work very well with certain cards from the Ancient Warriors archetypes specifically. That card that I will say is going to be Reborn Tengu. It's basically malicious. I personally feel like it's a malicious on steroids. It is a level 4 wind attribute Beast Warrior monster. I believe it has 1700 attack. But its specific effect allows itself to summon another Reborn Tengu when it is removed from the field. Now this includes sending it to the graveyard or sending it back to your hand. And there are currently 2 Ancient Warrior monsters that send monsters back to the opponent's, or rather the player's, respective hands. And then there's a multitude of Ancient Warrior monsters that remove other monsters or other cards from the field in order to get a card from your deck. So there is a lot of compatibility with that. And I do go into some of those strategies in the Sealed Only series, talking about, again, the importance of including cards that can work with that. The other aspect that I will say is that Gustos do tend to have also some compatibility based on the fact that most of their cards have trigger effects when they're sent from the hand to the graveyard. And again, there are a multitude of Ancient Warriors that allow you to send cards from your hand to the graveyard.
Get out, no way.
Yeah.
So are there like tuners that you can get out to go into other plays, or is there like what's the impetus behind Gusto on that?
Got it. So the Gusto play that I would say people definitely aren't considering is playing Gusto Griffin alongside any Gusto level 2 tuner. So Gusto Griffin's effect reads that when this card is sent from the hand to the graveyard, you can special summon one level 2, I believe, one level 2 Gusto tuner from your deck. So you send the 3-star monster, you get a level 2 tuner. Let's say you were to chain this, or rather activate this effect off of Sunmo. You can also then add an Ancient Warrior monster from your deck to your hand. So now you have 2 monsters on the field, and a potential extra monster that you can summon. And you can kind of either synchro, or you can go straight into, again, your Tri-Brigade Link monsters.
And none of the Ancient Warriors cause them to miss timing. It's all like at the same time.
Not at all.
Exactly. What in the world?
Exactly.
You can't be telling me in 2021 someone's getting like dual terminal 3 cards in here. It's like, no, these are viable. There are combos here.
Yeah, they are very, very viable. Especially because the fact that like some of the Ancient Warrior cards not only send monsters but send spells and traps. You can benefit off of having certain traps that trigger in the graveyard, activate, or rather go kind of like hand in hand with certain Ancient Warrior effects.
Well, awesome. Thank you. Thanks a million for enlightening me on the way that we can use tiny birds to enhance military actions. That's about everything that I have on my list. ArtistWithAfro, is there anything else that you wanted to add about Ancient Warriors at the end here that flew over my head that I didn't consider?
The only other thing that I would add is, again, when it comes to the depictions of certain stories or certain historical aspects, I do appreciate the fact that Konami does do their research and really tries to depict certain parts of the story or certain parts of various stories as accurately as possible, and then kind of takes that nuance and adds, really specific effects or really specific artistic designs based to events that have happened. Again, I am very, very excited, or rather, I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing more characters be included in the story. There are a multitude of popular characters that are in not only the Ancient Warriors archetype, but from the Romance of the Three Kingdoms and from the Dynasty Warrior games that I'm sure a lot of characters would enjoy seeing. There are also a lot of important, I would say, pivotal female characters that don't necessarily get the amount of sort of praise or representation because we currently have none of them show up in the card archetype.
And I wouldn't have even known. Like, this is the first I'm hearing about it. So yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I would like to see more of that. But for what we have, I do appreciate what Konami has done. And I think that if they were to continue doing this with other archetypes or with other historical stories, we could see more of, more of a representation of historical aspects, and people could actually, again, be interested in then following those different stories as they relate, or rather outside of Yu-Gi-Oh! Itself.
Cool. Well, hey, thank you again so much for joining me in helping to teach everyone about Ancient Warriors and what they're based on. Just as an outro, just to make sure, in case anyone decided they were going to skip this section like a jerk, where else can we find you, and what can you be doing there?
So again, folks can find me on the ArtistWithAfro YouTube channel. There'll be some sort of like notification somewhere down here or in the description down below.
All kinds of editing going on.
Right? I also do have a Twitter and an Instagram under the same name, so you can find me there. And yeah, I would say, if anything, if anybody has any questions, or again, if anybody's looking to, have any good duels or any conversations, totally hit me up. I'm totally down for anything. And yeah, I look forward to, I guess, hearing and seeing from more people. And I just want to, again, just take this time to thank you for allowing me to kind of come on this platform and give a big explanation to an archetype that, and I'll be honest, an archetype that really kept me in Yu-Gi-Oh! When I was this close to leaving.
And those are some of the best deck. Whenever you see someone who has that connection with the deck and you get to hear them talk about that and get really into it, that is the biggest treat. So thank you for sharing that love with all of us. Thank you all so much for watching, and a big thank you once again to ArtistWithAfro for agreeing to contribute to this video. I don't think it would be half as awesome as it is without him. Please, please, please go check him out. He's such a hidden gem in the community and deserves a lot more love than they're getting. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Do you think ancient warriors have what it takes to forge their own dynasty, or are they doomed to fade into the annals of history? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video around. It really does a lot to help me out. I'd also like to take this time to thank my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commander, CozyBoat275, Nebula Navigators, Billy Spence, Genesis Yu-Gi-Oh!, Gloomba331, Panther J, Shep Shao Shep, The Wizard Moose and the Fresh Prince of Conair, Cosmic Crusaders, Chaz Ghost, Colin Todd, Panda PLS, and Legendary Raven, as well as the lovely Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. And if you want to see another deck full of beastly warriors, check out this video I did on Boojins. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.